Originally I had much grander plans for this video, but I'll be lucky if it gets out before the end of March at this rate, so why don't we kick right off into it, shall we? This is Dallin Malna's 2017 Year in Review for Gaming. 2017 was a year of many games for me. So many, I decided to categorize them all, except for the ones I didn't, and these are those, and those start with Sundered. Sundered is a bit of a personal thorn in my side. I'd really been hungry for a Metroidvania-style game, and I wanted to dip my toe into Kickstarter. Looking at this, something backed by Square Enix seemed as safe a bet as any on terms of quality, and I still hold that the animation is beautiful. But the randomly generated levels, they really end up contributing to a bigger problem, which is the endless, non-specific waves of enemies. All in all, I really ended up regretting kickstarting this, and the frustrating nature of this game's design gave me flashbacks to the worst parts of Dark Souls. Combined with the slapdash nature of randomly generating terrains, it all compounds into an annoying, overwhelming amount of enemies that are difficult only because there are so many, and not because it takes any sort of wit to outdo them. I dropped this one a few hours in, and I don't have any desire to go back and finish it. I feel like it already wasted my money, and I don't want it to waste my time too. Honestly, it's just Dark Souls 1, but with less interesting character and level design, but also slightly less glitchy. When I realized this game was going to disrespect my time the same way the first one did, I just dropped it 30 hours in. It's not a terrible game, and I honestly think I like it better than the first, but I already beat Dark Souls, and 2 just wasn't different enough to warrant the time it demanded. I had other, better games to beat. And speaking of better games... To be fair, Mario Kart 8 could possibly change to a 4 out of 5 later. I only got it in December, and the 3 out of 5 rating is sort of a product of me assuming that its staying power isn't going to last for too terribly long. Right now, though, I have found great enjoyment playing with my family most nights. Now, it hasn't replaced Double Dash as my favorite Mario Kart, but the pick-up-and-play nature of the Switch really makes it a great time nonetheless. Honestly, it's easily the best multiplayer game on the Switch right now. I'm really not a competitive gamer. I just don't have the time or will to devote myself to a game well enough to beat people who apparently have nothing better to do with their lives than become inhumanly good at a game. And out of that section of competitive games, online multiplayer shooters are probably like one of my least favorite subsections. I was all geared up to hate Overwatch. I mean, everything from the PC crazy Blizzard to the toxic community surrounding it, even the gameplay should have amounted to a game I despised. Yet, I loved it. Now, I'll admit, most of that has to do with the fact that I play exclusively with a group of friends I know in real life, and frankly, none of us take the game very seriously. That being said, the game demands teamwork, and I love how many of the heroes play off each other in unique ways to really make it a fun time. It keeps me coming back for more and more with my buddies. The new stream of updates don't hurt either. I was surprised at how much I loved this silly multiplayer game, and how much it managed to keep my group of friends playing as a unit. Streets of Rage 2 was a game my buddy Moggle and I played on a whim, and had a surprisingly good time with it. It's one of those arcade games you think is gonna tank until you actually play it and realize, dang, this really holds up. Of course, we did play it with save states, but, you know, besides that, it honestly didn't feel dated at all. Check it out on Steam under the Sega Classics if you want a short but fun game to play with a friend on the cheap. I love the Devil May Cry series. Dante is just so dang charming, and the style is really goofy and cool. After the misstep that was DMC2, seeing the whirlwind that was DMC3 really was a wild ride. The gameplay is tougher and more complex than ever, and I loved every moment of it. Until the final boss. Turns out I had allocated my EXP in a dumb way, and physically couldn't do enough damage to hurt the final boss faster than he healed himself. Meaning, I had to go back and grind if I wanted to actually beat the game. Honestly, I hate pointless grinding more than anything, and that's the last thing I wanted to do in my tough-as-nails, skill-based hack and slash. So I decided that was as good a place as any to get off the ride. Look, I liked it a lot, but not enough to keep playing the same levels over and over again. Still, if you look up a guide beforehand and, you know, maybe play on easy unlike me, you're sure to have a rip-roaring time. I adore Kingdom Hearts. It's my favorite game series of all time. It gives me feelings that stick with me, and on an emotional level, it still really resonates with me. Playing Kingdom Hearts 1 was a special experience I still treasure to this day. sometimes it's good to just go back and experience things that really moved you. Playing it with my best friend who introduced me to the series just made it that much more of an enjoyable experience. I mean, I can't say much more about it than I haven't said before, other than it was great to realize you can totally skip Atlantica, and also being able to skip cutscenes in the HD version totally makes it worth the price of admission on its own. PC port win? Final Fantasy II is a game that is flawed and old, and I really, really liked it. I can't recommend it to anyone who's not already a pretty big Final Fantasy fan, and I will admit that without save scumming, it would be a nightmare. But for me, the way I played it with turbo mode and save states available, it was like coming home after being away on a long trip. All the old tropes were there, the simple sprites, the winding non-linear dungeons, not to mention the game and its battle system, while admittedly flawed, ended up inspiring an entirely different series that ended up refining it. All of that is something pretty darn cool if you ask me. For all the flaws, this game does remind me of the simpler days of RPG gaming, and all the charm and wonder it had to offer. Perhaps I'm just biased, because directly afterwards I played another Final Fantasy, and it didn't exactly impress me. Final Fantasy X is one of those games I wanted to love. I played it as a young child around the same time I played Final Fantasy VIII, so there's even some nostalgic grip to it for me. To this day, I think it has the best intro to any Final Fantasy game, bar none. But after that intro, the whole thing becomes a giant mess. The story is a horrible mishmash of weird whining about World War II Japan mixed with completely pointless jabs at the Catholic Church. And the characters are almost entirely unlikable, and their motivations are either unexplored or downright unbelievable. The pacing is awful. The game just goes from random event to random event without any sense of connection, agency, or urgency. For goodness sakes, I felt more railroaded in Final Fantasy X than I did 13. The battle system punishes you for not leveling all the characters up by putting up roadblocks only they can really pass. And on top of all that, it demands you stop your adventure right before the final boss and spend 10 to 15 hours grinding. As I mentioned before, that is something I am unwilling to do in anything but games that I just love. The only thing keeping this from becoming a 1 out of 5 star is there were like 2 scenes with Jecht and Titus that were genuinely engaging. The music had a few standout tracks, and most importantly, the HD version lets you use cheats to bypass that 15-hour grind wall. There is only one mainline Final Fantasy that I consider worse than this one, and that is 3. Honestly, I cannot begin to express how greatly I dislike this game. Even now it leaves a bad taste in my mouth. The only good thing I can say about this game is that the cheats let me bypass the dumb grind wall, so I didn't have to spend any longer on it than I had to, and I never have to go back. I was pleasantly surprised when playing Middle-earth: Shadow of War. I was honestly expecting it to be another bog-standard Ubisoft open-world game. I know they didn't make it, but still. Instead, what I got was effectively the best Assassin's Creed I've ever played, with a unique Middle-earth twist to boot. Admittedly, the core loop can get stale if you dally too long with the side missions, and the Nemesis system is crazy easy to abuse. The pacing is so tight, and the basics of light sneaking and simple hack and slashing has never been better. If you've ever enjoyed any Assassin's Creed game, I think it's worthwhile to pick this one up. What can I say about Breath of the Wild that hasn't been said before? It revitalized the Zelda series, became a killer app for the Switch's launch, and made one of the best open-world games around. I personally only felt the wonder and excitement everyone else did for about the first, let's be generous and say 20 hours. But it remained very fun even up until 30 hours, when I had beaten all 4 of the main dungeons. After that, I spent about 10 more hours collecting the Master Sword and some memories, a few other extras like that, and by that point I was honestly ready to move on. To be honest, I do not think the core gameplay loop is enough to warrant more than a fairly streamlined playthrough like I did, and I also feel continuing to pursue side quests would only have been a detriment to my experience. But staying on a fairly streamlined route gave me a game that I enjoyed from start to finish, and the fact that it let me get off when I wanted to is something I have to give it major credit for. If I'm being honest, I am sad to hear that all future 3D Zeldas are going to try and copy it, since I think the wonder I felt at first won't be there at all for the new game, and the real lack of puzzles was a huge detriment to the overall experience. But putting all that aside, I can't say that I had anything less than a great time with this game. Look, I don't think it's a masterpiece, but if Nintendo can somehow manage to combine the strengths of old 3D Zelda in the format of this new one, that would be a game to buy day one for sure. Outlast is a terrible game that perfectly encapsulates everything that I hate about the state of modern suspense games. Survival horror is dead and Slender Man killed him. These games all have paper-thin stealth mechanics, instant death traps, no risk-reward system for fighting back, and a complete lack of pacing, engaging story, or worthwhile game mechanics. I cannot speak lowly enough of this genre and how it killed one of the greatest and most fun type of game ever made. The only positive thing I can say about this game is there were a couple decent moments in the middle that weren't quite so scripted and were a little more exploration focused, where it sort of worked as a spoopy walking simulator. First-person horror games have never and will never work. They're all boring garbage that only appeal to the easily excitable Let's Player looking for something to scream at. It's simply impossible to make a good first-person horror game. Oh. When I first saw the trailer for Resident Evil 7, I was convinced I would hate this game. It had all the earmarks of the hot garbage the horror genre has become. And when I played that demo trying to draw in the PT crowd, and it hinted at a terrible closet hiding game in the vein of Amnesia or Outlast, I was really nervous. But boy was I wrong. Gone are the supernatural elements that suck you out of the experience. Gone are those stupid Falcon closets to hide in. Instead, you're given a house to explore, limited ammo to conserve, puzzles to solve, tight pacing, it has camp and genuine horror mixed with surprising elegance. This game proved me wrong. Well, I don't honestly think this is even in the top half of the mainline Resident Evil games. It was enough fun that I'm coming up on beating it the third time and I'm still enjoying it. I'm even attempting a 100% run for it. While I suspect I'll always enjoy the classic Resi style, which was a bit more original and had better puzzles and monster design, if this is the direction for the series in the foreseeable future, I'll be okay. And if they can bring in more varied monster design and add an emphasis and a greater variety of difficult puzzles and focus less on the just serviceable combat, I think they have a real recipe for success here.
And jumping from one 7 to another, we have Never 7, End of Infinity. This is the first game in the visual novel category. I actually did a full review on this one, so feel free to go over there to hear my extended thoughts, but just to sum it up here, I felt like this game was full of untapped potential that was better executed by its sequels. Also, Haruko's best girl, Fight Me IRL. I also did a video on Doki Doki Literature Club, but it's not as in-depth. So I'll say a bit more here. The game was far from perfect and had a little bit too much repeating content for my taste, but it managed to genuinely unnerve me at least twice, and as an ad, it did a wonderful job of getting me invested in whatever Team Salvato comes up with next. It is free, and a complete run-through only takes 4 hours, so honestly, if you're even the tiniest bit intrigued, give it a shot. Just be sure to grab a guide after you hit the credits so you can go back and get the good ending. I mean, it isn't that different or fulfilling, but it also doesn't take very long to get, so I personally think it's worth the time to do. Wow, I reviewed a lot of visual novels this year, didn't I? Wait a minute. I got that one, I got the Never 7. Handmaid's Tale. Danganronpa, we got this Never 7. Oh, please tell me I reviewed something other than a visual novel last year. Ha! Crisis averted. In all seriousness, Danganronpa is the most thorough and lengthy review I've ever tackled. It's not perfect, but I'm actually pretty proud of that review, so if you like any of my stuff, give it a shot. The game itself left me feeling rather... I can't really recommend it, but I also don't think it's so terrible I should warn you to stay away. However, its sequel, on the other hand... I never expected to enjoy Danganronpa 2 as much as I did. I actually recorded hours of footage and wrote down notes for a script to tear it to shreds like I did the first one, but when I finished it, I just didn't have the heart to make the video. This game does have a lot of the same pitfalls that the first one had. The story is dumb, it's not internally consistent at all, and often it's too focused on being quirky to bother being a good mystery. But the characters are a lot better written, and even when it does lie to you to keep the surprises coming, at least it plays with your expectations a bit. The biggest flaw it has is that you absolutely have to play the first one to get the most out of it, and I just don't know if it's worth the time to go there, especially since everything after this game is of questionable quality. But if you already happen to play one all the way through and didn't bother to play the second game, you're really doing yourself a disservice. Until Dawn was another replay game, but this time I went through it with a group of friends, and making snap decisions by committee actually really changed the way the game plays. It makes a surprisingly entertaining party game, and in that capacity, I cannot recommend it enough. Side note, I do know this isn't technically a visual novel, but I mean, it basically plays like one, so just go with me on this, okay? Despite it not being my favorite game of last year, Mystic Messenger might be the one that sticks with me the most. It has some terrible pacing issues, wonky spelling and translation quirks that maybe indicate their translators weren't exactly native English speakers, and there are just a couple of plot beats I really can't get on board with. But that's about all the bad I can say about it. The characters are wonderfully endearing, the melodrama balances emotion and humor in just the right amount to keep you fully engaged, and the fact that it plays out in real time just adds to the whole experience. Getting to know these characters over the course of about 2 months really made life bearable during a pretty rough transition time for me. Heck, 707 is my profile pic everywhere now, and I may just be cosplaying him at MTAC this year. It's free on Android and iPhone, so if you enjoy any of my recommendations, I implore you to download this and give it a try. Now, others may disagree, but I suggest either doing Yusung or Jaehee's route first, and make sure you save 707s for the end because it leads straight into the true ending. Honestly, I believe Mystic Messenger to be a modern classic. I think people will look back on this as a touchstone for new ideas and trend setting in writing and gameplay. Quick side note, at the time of this review, I have not played any of the DLC or extra routes. This is just covering the main game to the secret ending. But under that capacity, I can't recommend it enough. And speaking of modern classics, the next category is returning classics. This is where I talk about games that either invoke the classics in an obvious way, or about classic series returning from the graves. Sometimes both at once. First up on this nostalgic road trip is Bravely Default. I do not like this game. It goes from generic, uninspired fantasy to terrible copy-pasted mess. There is 1/4 of a game here, tops. About 15 hours worth of content is stretched into a 60-hour game. And then it has the gall to not even bother copy-pasting anymore and just demand that you grind for another 5 to 10 hours to get the real ending. This is beyond unacceptable. Games like this should be recycled and destroyed. Other than a couple of nice tracks from the OST, this game is irredeemably bad, and you could not pay me to ever play it again. I followed the development of Cosmic Star Heroine pretty closely and was really excited for it to come out. It has some really solid presentation, but in the end it kind of turned out to be pretty forgettable. I think the developer can definitely continue to push forward from this point and make games that are truly wonderful. But on the whole, all I can say about this game is that while I had fun playing it for the most part, it started to fade from my mind the moment I put it down. Mighty Gunvolt Burst is another somewhat forgettable game. Seems like anything involving Mighty No. 9 is doomed to mediocrity at best. I mean, what is there to say? The burst system seems somewhat counterintuitive, and I didn't feel any reason to bother completing it a second time with another character. Nothing really offensive, but not exactly anything to write home about either. Missed potential is the best way I can describe Wolfenstein: The New Order. It starts out really strong, but quickly devolves into a mechanically light shooter without much to say. Much like Cosmic Star Heroine, for the most part I had fun while playing it, but started to forget about it as soon as I set it down. The main difference is this game had such a strong start that I was convinced there was a good chance this would be something amazing. Sadly, it was not. Wow, I played a lot of filler this year. Alien Isolation's greatest claim to fame, for me, is how much better it is than crap like Outlast. It's serviceable. It has a few moments that are even great, but 100% of them are when the alien isn't around. The combination of stealth and scares actually brought me mentally back to Thief a few times, and that is great. but the random alien encounters really threw off the tension, and anytime the facehugger showed up, the game quickly became an annoying pit of trial and error. Honestly, if I hadn't also played Resident Evil 7 this year, it might have been the benchmark for first-person survival horror games by being tolerable instead of the worst thing ever. And I do know it came out first, but I'm dealing with games that are out now, so there's no reason to play this over Resident Evil 7. So don't. Oh my gosh, we finally escaped the cage of just okay and broke out into pretty good! Blaster Master Zero is a remake of an NES game, and it feels like an NES game. It's simplistic in both presentation and gameplay. However, the little twists and flourish that Inti creates give this game really help it stand out above others like it. There's nothing mind-blowing about it, but for $10 I certainly feel I got my money's worth. Pick it up on the Switch if you have one, or the 3DS if you don't. The gameplay is varied enough that you ought to enjoy your time from start to finish, and even getting 100% for the true ending. Now things start getting really good. You don't need me to tell you how great Sonic Mania is, and honestly, I think it deserves 90% of the praise it's getting. It's a super fun game with imaginative set pieces, great game flow, and truly wonderful level design. I only wish there had been a few more original levels and a few less glitches on launch. I also think having Blue Spheres as a checkpoint game and not giving it any tangible rewards after you collect all the extras was a misstep, but honestly, these are just nitpicks in an otherwise stellar and lovingly built game. While Shovel Knight, Spectre of Torment, falls just short of what I believe to be the high mark in the series, that of course being Plague of Shadows, I think both the story and the campaign are as slick as ever, with the whole experience really feeling streamlined. You can't go wrong picking this one up. As with everything else Yacht Club Games has made, this game is a treat. I laughed, I cried, it moved me, Bob. And with the final chapter of the OG Shovel Knight book coming up soon, I'm excited to see what else they put their efforts into making. Shovel Knight and all of its campaigns are available on everything up to and including your toaster. And if you were on the fence about buying this game, it now is one good campaign and two great ones, so give it a shot on the toaster of your choice. As you all know, Metroid is my favorite Nintendo IP, so finally having a Metroid game after all these years, and it's 2D, and it's actually good, I couldn't have been happier. I even picked up these silly amiibo just because I wanted to support the series. Samus Returns is very different from a lot of 2D Metroids, and despite being a remake, doesn't play things safe. As a result, it has some rough edges, both from its bold attempts to move the series in a new direction, and also from being a remake of a game made over 2 decades ago on rather aged hardware at this point. Still, it's a rip-roaring time, and a game I 100%ed, and I'm also likely to go back and try in hard mode soon. Honestly, this game made even my cynical heart warm and hopeful for the future, and the fun didn't stop there. I'll admit that part of the reason I was so okay with the more experimental nature that Samus Returns took was because of AM2R coming out beforehand. This fan-made remake of Metroid 2 opts to perfect and polish the Metroid formula as it had been presented in previous games, and does so wonderfully. The pixel art is gorgeous, the environmental design is totally on point, and the way it incorporates things throughout the Metroid series really endeared it to me. And for the low price of free, it's really worth checking out. Much like Sonic Mania, you can tell it was made by fans who were really passionate about the series and wanted to show the best of it they could. Honestly, for the first time since 2002, it feels good and safe to be a Metroid fan, and there's a real hope for quality titles in the future. With the Switch selling like hotcakes, there's also a real chance that Metroid will finally get the credit it deserves in the near future. Hopefully, Prime 4 can do for Metroid what Awakening did for all of Fire Emblem. I played a lot of Fire Emblem this year, and honestly, apart from Fire Emblem, they just don't make SRPGs that I like anymore. So it's wonderful to know I had so much content to sift through this year. I'd like to bridge this section to the last by starting off with a game that is both a returning classic and a Fire Emblem title. Have you ever felt nostalgic playing a brand new game? Now, I don't mean the situation like Shovel Knight, where it intentionally exists to evoke feelings of nostalgia, but rather a game that so perfectly captures the wonder you felt, playing new games as a child, that you feel nostalgic for it even as you play it. That's how Fire Emblem Echoes Shadows of Valentia was for me. I'm going to be honest and tell you that after Awakening, I felt the Fire Emblem series began to trade quality for quantity in the wake of its success. I felt there were a lot of subpar spin-offs and even a few main title games that were seriously underwhelming. But Shadows of Valentia removed all those misgivings from me. This game shows that Intelligent Systems haven't forgotten about their more hardcore fans and are willing to take chances and innovate in weird ways. The melding of a much older game with some Awakening-style systems, in addition to brand new and original mechanics, really makes this game shine as uniquely enjoyable. Now, I would still probably recommend Awakening to a brand newcomer before this game, but if you are a Fire Emblem fan of any type, and especially if you're one who felt a little left behind by this new wave of games, you should really give Shadows of Valentia a try. I mean, look, Fire Emblem Heroes is a mobile game, so I don't really know what I was expecting, but somehow it managed to go below those expectations. The unique art each character got was cool, but everything in the game felt almost predatory. I know one friend who wasted over $300 trying to get a hero he loved. Now, look, I know most mobile games are like this, but something about the fact that this is attached to a Nintendo property that I adore just made the whole thing feel even more slimy. And the game systems really do come down to numbers more than strategy. So I just can't recommend this to even hardcore Fire Emblem fans. I think it does more harm than good to the brand. Hot dog was Fire Emblem Fate's disappointment for me. I could spend hours talking about how much I dislike this game, how it feels rushed, how it copies elements from Awakening poorly without understanding what made the original concept so good, how the characters are some of the series' worst, how the parrot mechanic is so broken every unit is now virtually required to use it effectively, cutting your tactical options in half, how every mission feels the same, how creating a self-insert OC is so much less fun when you're the chosen one instead of a close observer, how the relationships and romance feel so unbelievably stilted, how the Pokemon-like release was just a huge cash grab, how the DLC was some of the lowest tier stuff we've ever seen in a Fire Emblem game. You know what? I'm just gonna stop here. When people complained that Awakening was dumbing down Fire Emblem and making it anime waifu trash, I thought that was mostly coming from people who hadn't been supporting the series anyway. But this game, it lives up to every unearned accusation Awakening had and more. Fire Emblem games should never be a slog. A slow, continuing obligation of just trudging through pointless, thoughtless encounter after pointless, thoughtless encounter. Characters being forcibly paired together, artificially lowering the amount of units you control, a heavy emphasis on fan service of all kinds rather than quality gameplay. Wait a minute! This is Fire Emblem Warriors! I'm gonna let you in on a secret. I actually really liked Hyrule Warriors. It was chock full of nods to fans and references for those who loved the whole series. Fire Emblem Warriors is just lazy. It has far fewer characters, modes, maps, so much of it is even copy-pasted. The newer stuff is nice, but it really does feel like you get shortchanged if you pay $60 for this. If you are a Switch owner and also a Warriors fan, I suggest checking out Hyrule Warriors Complete Edition coming out before checking out this game, even if you're a Fire Emblem fan like me. Ugh, I need something to wash the taste of mediocrity out of my mouth. I know. I'll admit it, I probably have a bit of nostalgia yearning for Fire Emblem Path of Radiance. I used to spend hours reading about it in Nintendo Power and planning my strategies about what I would do when I finally got it. While I was surprised by how many loose ends it leaves off for its sequel, I can't help but giving it a full 5 out of 5 for being the fulfillment of all those dreams and anticipation I had stored up over all those years. The scenarios are varied, it's difficult without being overly cheap. Most importantly, every single character is interesting, and I was just upset I couldn't have them all in my party. There's a reason people still love Ike despite him not being a long-standing character, versus how people groan whenever the Fates characters appeared. This was classic Fire Emblem on its way out. But boy, what a way to start the beginning of the end. If you're a Fire Emblem fan of any kind, you owe yourself to play this gem.
Before I sign off, I'd like to present to you one last category. Dalin Malna's top and bottom 5 games of the year. This is sort of like having a flashback to an event that happened 5 minutes ago, so I'll keep it brief and start off with some honorable mentions. The dishonorable mention for this year is Fire Emblem Fates. It didn't make the cut on the actual list because the rest of the games are definitely of lower quality, but I can't deny this was the most disappointing game I played this year. There are so few solid SRPGs that come out, and to have a Fire Emblem entry of all things be a slog to get through was a real blow to me. My honorable mention of the year goes to Kingdom Hearts Final Mix. This is one of my favorite games ever, so replaying it and putting it on the top of my list this year would have been a little anticlimactic, so I decided to put it here instead. Honestly, it still holds up really well, and overall, it just has that wonderful PS2 magic and slightly better resolution. Outlast never really stood a chance with me. I hate this genre of games. They're not scary, mechanically engaging, or narratively compelling. I promise if you think this is the pinnacle of what horror games have to offer, I can help you find so much better. AM2R managed to edge out Samus Returns, and you know it's a year with some strong highs when a Metroid game is only coming in 5th place for me. This game showed more polish and a better understanding of what fans love in classic Metroid than anything we've seen in over a decade. The flawed game it's remaking and the need to stick so closely to that structure is probably what keeps it from hitting truly amazing highs, but there's no denying that as a Metroid fan, this is an experience you can't afford to miss. Fire Emblem Heroes is a crappy mobile game and an easy target, and I don't even care. It's dumb, and it's smelly, and it tries to trick you into spending way too much money because of pretty JPEGs. I can't even think of a reason to play this game, even as a fan. Just say no to gotcha, kids, okay? Okay. Resident Evil 7 was a game I was convinced was going to be horrible. And despite all the radical changes that on the surface looked to be turning the Resident Evil series into everything I hated, they managed to take that genre and reinvent it into the world's first great first-person horror game. While it does sort of feel like classic Resi Light, I can't help but praise this game for all it does right, as well as be excited for how it turns all those lazy, brainless tropes on their head and uses them to make something that's actually spooky, well-paced, and mechanically engaging. Final Fantasy X is a game that I should like based on nostalgia alone. I have good memories of playing random bits of it with my cousins, which is the same situation of Final Fantasy VIII that I love. I also think it has probably the greatest intro to any Final Fantasy ever. But its ham-fisted attempts at having a message feel harder than its railroaded, uninteresting world or completely unlikable and dull characters. This game also started the trend of the only one choice method to party management that I despise in Final Fantasy games. What I mean is it gives you a fairly large assortment of characters, and rather than letting you choose who you like and allowing nearly all party formations to be viable for each encounter, it has a clear formation you need to use if you ever hope to win without grinding, and it forces you to keep the entire party leveled, which artificially extends playtime, and forces you to use characters that you hate as much as those you don't. There is not enough time in the day for me to go over all the reasons I hate this game, but thankfully it's over and I never have to touch it again. Mystic Messenger was a game that really helped me emotionally this year. It was just the right game at the right time. It's not perfect at all, trust me. It's honestly very unpolished, filled with spelling errors and translation snafus. The pacing can be pretty wonky at times. Some of the characters are too stupid to be alive. I'm looking at you, V. Despite all this, the game touched me in a way that very few others have. It's free on iOS and Google Play, so please, if anything about this game has caught your eye, at least give it a shot. Even if it only got a 4 out of 5 ranking for me, it still obtains the legendary title. Sundered is a game I have very little to say about. The reason it's so high on this dislike list is probably because I kickstarted it. I was really excited for the initial idea, but what I got in execution is nearly unplayable. The endless and thoughtless spawning of enemies kill any chance of having an enjoyable atmosphere to soak in the pacing and the mechanics systems. It's a broken mess of a game that left me feeling like I was sold a bill of goods. I dropped it only a few hours in once I realized how broken it was. The game didn't leave me furious like Final Fantasy X. That's probably because it was so unplayable, I dropped it before I had a chance to get that mad. Path of Radiance is the game that brought back my childhood love of games. There's something so inviting and charming about this console Fire Emblem. It always kept me feeling cozy from start to finish. Honestly, playing this got me even more hyped for whatever the Switch Fire Emblem happens to be. Console Fire Emblem has always been so good, and I can't wait to see what's on the horizon for the series. I hope we get more games like this one, that intentionally set up for sequels and have a grander scope and all that sort of thing. Bravely Default is a game with virtually no redeeming qualities. Anything clever or likable it does is swallowed up into a never-ending time loop and mandatory grinding. There's 20 hours of content here max, stretched out into 60 plus hours. This is inexcusable, and whoever okayed this decision should be fired. I have just shy of 400 games ranked on my Groovy page, and of those 400, only 6 have ever been given the dishonor of having a 1-star rating. This is one of them. This game has earned its place in the Hall of Shame. May it rot there forever. Shadows of Valentia has the unique distinction of being my game of the year that actually came out in the year. Crazy, right? 2017 had less home run 5 out of 5 games than last year for me, but this game made it worth it. It felt both classic and modern. The art was gorgeous, the mechanics fine-tuned, the music evocative, the characters and story tweaked just enough to make it feel like a classic tale of heroism without feeling outdated. This game embodied the reason I love games so much, and it gave me hope for the future of Fire Emblem. Maybe in this new world where Fire Emblem has multiple releases and spin-offs every year, not everyone's going to be a home run. But as long as 1 out of every 3 of them is a games like Shadows of Valentia, I'll be satisfied. Well, that was my 2017 list of games. Hopefully you found something new to try out from this list, and maybe I helped you avoid a few time wastes as well. Before I'd go, I'd like to do a little metric roundup to sort of cap off the year. In 2017, I finished 34 games, 2 of which being replays. Of those 34 games, there were 1 1-star, 5 2-stars, 9 3-stars, 16 4-stars, and 3 5-stars. My average rating for games this year was 3.4. The shortest game I beat was Streets of Rage at about 2 hours, and the longest it took me to finish a game was Bravely Default at just under 59 hours. I quit before technically beating the title. I've listed my Groovy below if you want further information. I don't know what lies in store for 2018, but gaming at least is already off to a nice start. And expect a lot of Switch games to appear next year. My name is Dalin Malna, signing off well into 2018. God bless.